Good evening and welcome. Welcome to our budget meeting of Monday, December the 20th, 2021, in exceptional times. As we know, numbers are very high right now in Quebec, and there's been a lot of changes. Send out a robocall to those who received it. We're doing what we can in the city to keep our residents safe. And that really is going to be up to all of you to try to help, because I think the government already, that's the way they're trying to send the message that governments can only do so much. And it's really up to the people who, after all these years now, it's almost 2 years, we know what to do to not to spread COVID, which is, get vaccinated, wear masks, wash your hands, physically distance. And in this particular case, now that numbers are so high, we're going to have to keep our gatherings small. And when we do get together with people that are immunocompromised or senior, that we take special care not to transmit the virus to them and ensure that they're wearing masks and we're wearing masks and we're tested if we're having a gathering, and do all the things we know to do, because that's the population we really want to protect. So in terms of municipal services, every day it's changing, and we have modified services we're providing, and we're going to be closing certain services and modifying the way we run our library, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to discuss those details tonight with council and come forward with more recommendations based on Santé Publique's recommendations to us on what we can do to help contain the spread. So maintenant, je veux dire bonjour à tout le monde. C'est la réunion ce soir sur notre budget pour l'année 2021 et notre triennial budget capital des dépenses pour 2022, 2023 et 2024. Even though it's a special meeting, we should definitely take a moment of silence to pray for all those that are presently in emergency and hospital. The numbers are going up every day, and hope for their speedy recovery, and for all of us to be able to do our part to help them. So I have with us Councillor Burku, Councillor Cindy Ben-Isri, Councillor Stephen Erdely, Councillor Andy Schuster, Councillor Liar Azarat, Councillor Mike Cohen, Councillor Mitch Kajavsky, and members of staff, as you see on the screen. This meeting is going to primarily be run by our Minister of Finance, Councillor Stephen Erdely, who always does a great job explaining how we come to making the decisions we do with respect to budget and how we manage our funds. So I'll be saying very little, but we will allow Stephen to run the meeting, explain how people can ask questions and so forth. And after this meeting at 7 o'clock, there is another meeting concerning our tax rates and a couple of other items that are on the agenda, and that's at 7 o'clock. This meeting should go for about 45 minutes. So, Councillor Erdely, I'm going to pass it on to you, and look forward to listening.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, yeah, as the Mayor mentioned, I'll be doing the presentation on the budget in a moment. I also do want to mention there is a special meeting on Wednesday at 6:30 to ratify the tax rate. So, I urge you to join as well for that one. Aujourd'hui, je vais faire la présentation sur le budget de fonctionnement et budget d'investissement triennal en anglais, mais si vous avez des questions, vous pouvez nous demander en anglais aussi. So I'll be doing the presentation in English, but if there are any questions, you can ask in either English or French. So I'm going to share my screen. So again, as mentioned, it's the operating budget, and it's the triennial capital investment budget, or three-year capital investment budget that goes for 2022, 2023, and 2024. And we'll talk a bit more about that a bit later. So I'll go through the sequence of the presentation. So in terms of the sequence, we'll be starting with the budget process. I'll give some background on the principles, an overview of the budget for 2022. I'll talk a bit about some of the details, including the local and agglomeration and revenue and expenses. We'll go through the tax rates that again will be ratified shortly. And I'll talk about some of the investment priorities for our capital project. And so these are for large scale items. And I'll go through the plan at least for the current year and for the following years as well. And there'll be a question period. So as mentioned, so if you have any questions, you can reach out and go to côtesaintluc.org/council. You can ask any questions. Si vous avez des questions, vous pouvez faire en ligne. So you can do that anytime. And at the end of the presentation, we'll take the questions. So I'll share the timeline, and we're starting at 12 o'clock. So at the top of the hour, so to speak, in terms of the presentation, in terms of the slide. So it started in June. We did our pre-budget consultation. It's the second time we did this, where we gave residents an opportunity to share their feedback. What we've done in previous years is we asked residents if they had any questions on the evening of the budget. Of course, the problem is at that point, it's too late to make any changes because the budget is already finalized. So over the next few months, we determined the guiding principles, looked at our salaries and fixed contracts, which are sort of the fixed items. Did each department prepare their budget? In November, we reviewed the capital projects, and obviously was a little bit more difficult this year because of the election going on. The draft budget was presented to council in November, along with the draft tax rates. And in December, we did a final review of the budget. And where we are today is December 20th, and hopefully to approve the budget. In terms of the guiding principles, I won't read through the slide per se, but just to go through some of the key points. So the goal is a balance between revenue and expenses, and we have to keep in mind the burden on taxpayers. Anytime we make a decision, we try to reflect on how that will affect those of you that are paying taxes. And we look at the long-term financial viability of the city, and as well as the sustainability of any service or program. We try to optimize grants as much as possible. And one of the key ones we've been able to get is the tech grant, which is a grant from the federal and provincial government through the gas tax. And we've been able to get grants over the years, and there's a separate slide on that coming up shortly. But we've been successful in terms of the Aquatic Center getting significant grants, and most recently for Kerwin Park. And we try to leverage our internal funds. So in other words, if we can borrow from ourselves through what we call the working fund, we try to do that as opposed to borrowing from a bank, although we've done well in terms of interest rates lately. To keep going, sorry, I skipped a slide here. Okay, so we also want to make sure that there's enough funds once we do create something. So for example, after we created the Aquatic Center, we had to make sure there's sufficient funds to run the center moving forward. We look at the effects and the greater good of the community. And one of the things that we've been trying to focus on and continue to focus on is transparency. And that's why we present the budget. That's why all the information I should mention is available. So this, including this presentation, is available. If you go to côtesaintluc.org/finance, you'll have all the presentation, not just from this year and previous years. And the goal is to continue sharing more information. And we want to look at programs that'll add value to the city and be good for benefit to all residents. In terms of the taxation and where the money goes, we have what we call local services. Those are through the city. And then we have agglomeration services. So on the local side, some things like public works, for example, or roads and waterworks maintenance, waste collection, public safety, library, recreation, the ACC, and our debt service. On the agglomeration side, we have items such as the police, the fire, the courts, the municipal evaluation, public transit, so including the STM, for example, and water treatment and distribution. So that is done at the agglomeration level, and 911 and social housing. In terms of some of the highlights of the budget, so this is our third year of our current tax roll or evaluation roll. So just a heads up for residents, The new evaluation roll will be coming out in the fall, scheduled in September of 2022. So that'll give residents a sense as to where their evaluation, what their evaluation will be for the next 3 years. The increase in taxation revenue is 2.65%. And this is from a I guess the biggest number is the 1.75%, which is the increase in municipal taxes for the average residential home. And this includes houses, so single family homes, condos, and townhouses. And that's for those that had a 14.2% increase on their current roll. And we'll talk a bit more about that a bit later. Additionally, a new item that we created this year is a road reserve, a road financial reserve. And this is to help set aside some money for the city to continue working on road repairs. Over the last few years, the priority has been more on the pipes, on the water, and that will still, of course, be one of our top priorities. But the goal moving forward is also to focus on the roads and catching up in terms of road repairs. So that'll be an additional 0.5% for the average home. And if we total that up, it works out to 2.25%, although again, it's still well below the rate of inflation, at least what they're predicting for inflation right now. There's also a new tariff this year for swimming pools. So it'll be $50 for above ground, $100 for in-ground, and for semi-private pools in condos or apartment buildings, it'll be a $300 tariff. In terms of the total increase in revenue, it's 4.15%. The total increase in expenses is higher at 5.89%, and this includes both the local and agglomeration, and the agglomeration, which we'll talk about again a bit later. The increase, including what Côte Saint-Luc is paying our portion of the debt from 2020, it works out to between 10, almost 11% of an increase. So that is significant, one of the largest increases. And just to mention, we had received a grant from the provincial government to cover the cost of COVID and COVID-related items, so of approximately $3 million. Last year, we had originally allocated about half of that money, but in the end, thankfully, we did not need to use it, so we're able to allocate that money for the 2022 financial year. So to go over the impact of the current valuation roll, and again, this is the third year of the current roll. So the average for a residential home was 14.2%. If you look at single family homes, it was slightly higher at 17.1. The condos or townhouses, an increase, but at 8.2. Duplexes 11.4, and apartments at 19.7. For non-residential properties, the average was 7.8%. And what we did, because we knew for some family homeowners, it was a significant increase. So what we did is we spread the increase over 3 years to lessen the effect. So for those who got a larger increase, it sort of slowed down the effect and minimized it to help protect them from a large tax increase in 1 year. In terms of the property tax or water tax increase, so again, the evaluation from an average home is now an average family home in Côte Saint-Luc is $545,000. If you look back to the previous roll, it was $477,200. And if you could see what we did, we spread the increase. So rather than getting the increase of $67,000 in 1 year, they got a $22,600 increase per year over the 3 years. And again, we'll see. I'm not going to make predictions other than what we've seen recently is some larger increases in the purchase price of homes. But obviously, we'll have to wait to see. And one of the key items, I guess, just to mention in advance, is how our evaluation increase. So for the average home in Côte Saint-Luc compares to the average home for the island of Montreal. So if they're comparable, that's great. If the average home in Montreal goes up higher, then that's better. If the average home in Côte Saint-Luc is higher, that is often what leads to a larger tax increase. But we don't have to worry about that right now. We'll be talking more about that in the fall of 2022. In terms of how this works in tax dollars, so the average home, again, which was $545,000, based on the tax rate, and what we've done is when the valuation goes up, we slowly lower the municipal tax rate or the mill rate. so that it offsets and to have let's say a lesser increase. So what we see based on the new tax rates and the water reserve, and including the new road financial reserve, it works out to $123 increase for an average residential home, or 2.25%. And again, that includes the $28. So if it wasn't for not including that, it's just under $100, or 1.75% increase for an average residential home. The next example, this is for an average house. So this is basically for a single family home, which had a slightly larger increase at 17.1%, and the average evaluation for a single family house or single family home at $692,300. So for them, it would be about a 3% increase. And then again, this is including the roads financial reserve. So it works out to about a $207 increase. In terms of revenues, so for revenues, the largest one, of course, is for our municipal taxes, which accounts for $67 million. And this is both for the local and agglomeration portion. We also have a small amount from local improvements taxes. This is for going back to Cavendish Mall. If we look at revenue from tariffs, we see last year we had the black bin tariffs for where homes that didn't already have a black bin had a tariff for that. This year, of course, that is it was a one-time imposed tariff. For the current, or the upcoming year, I should say, it'll be a $50,000 tariff based on the estimated increase from the pools. We also have a small increase for compensation for city services for certain properties that were tax exempt. In terms of compensation LEO taxes, this is to cover the amounts that we would get for schools, for hospitals, for the post office, for example, and it's given to us through the provincial or federal government. So overall, an increase of 4.15%. In terms of the revenue from the taxes, so the largest is the residential properties at 40.5 million roughly. And again, that's based on a 1.75% increase. Then we have the apartments, vacant land. And if you notice, the vacant land amount is down, and that's, I guess, partly a good thing in that there's less vacant land. So what we've seen over the last few years, and in the last year or two in particular, some of the vacant land has been converted to housing. So that's why there's a decrease there. Then we have non-residential, the water reserve, and again, the road reserve, which is a new item this year. In terms of the municipal taxation, municipal tax provision, so this is based on an amount we put for those who contest or dispute their municipal valuation. This number is less this year because we're the third year of the tax roll or the valuation roll. Next year it'll be a larger amount, as usually it's in the first year where homes tend to argue or dispute their valuation. And again, if we look at the total estimated increase, total revenue from taxes, it's increased at 2.97, including all the different components. In terms of revenue from local improvement taxes and tariffs, as mentioned, so the newest item is the swimming pool tariff, and that is in compliance with Section 244.1 of the Act respecting municipal taxation. And again, this is a new item. One of the points that will be coming up this year, and this is based on provincial government regulations, are changes to the way pools, outdoor pools, have to deal with fencing and security. So this tariff will partly be to oversee that, but also partly because of the increased water use. And one of the things we're trying to do is reduce the amount of water that residents are using, and to tax them or tariff them based on their usage more so. And we'll be talking a bit more about that later in the presentation. And again, it's a significant decrease here because, of course, last year there was $240,000 for the black bin, so that's why it's a large decrease, but nothing, out of the ordinary in terms of the way things are done. In terms of other revenue, so there's a few key items I want to mention. That the biggest one is the property transfer duties. So last year we had budget of 3.2 million. Right now we're sitting at approximately 4.7, 4.8 million. So in terms of property transfers, this is one that has been the last few years above the budget. So we've increased the budget in terms of revenue to better reflect the actuals. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but in 2020, when COVID first hit, we were at one point we were well below what we expected and worried about a possible deficit created by this line item. But in the end, in 2020, there was quite a few homes that were sold, and in fact, we ended up with a surplus based on this item, based on this line item, on the property transfers or welcome tax. And again, for next year, we're predicting an increase in this value. Some of the other ones to mention, in terms of recreation, in terms of fines, we're looking at and expecting to see things hopefully returning back to normal, although I know right now with Omicron, it doesn't necessarily seem that way, but our prediction is hopeful in terms of a return to normal. One that is down, I should mention, interest revenues. So this is interest that the city gets from the funds we have in the bank. So so we're predicting less interest. However, we'll see later on in terms of borrowing, the lower interest rate actually benefits the city more in terms of our borrowing. And just to mention, well, we'll talk more about the government grants on the next slide, but there too, there was an increase there. So overall, in terms of other revenues, we're looking at a 15.6% increase. So in terms of grants, the city has done quite well on a few of these items. So the first two in terms of leveraging the waste or the way we deal with waste. We've managed over the last 12, 13 years to more than or almost triple the amount of waste that is diverted, and we've reduced the amount of waste that goes to landfill by about 44%. And that's something we hope to continue doing so. And partly because of that, we've managed to receive more grants in terms of what they call the redevance and Recy Québec. So the more we recycle, the more we get in grants from the government. One that's up significantly is the library. We're expecting to receive about 150,000, which is almost triple what we received in 2021. And again, here you have some of the other key items, the Pacte Fiscal as well. This is in terms of from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. In terms of the breakdown, this is similar to last year. The largest item in terms of revenue, I should say, is revenue from taxes, about 85.6% of our revenue. And this is something that will continue that way, at least for the short term, based on the way the city is set up. But it's comparable in terms of last year's numbers. On the expense side, I'll highlight some of the key differences. So one of which is in terms of the appropriation from cumulative surplus. And we'll see this on the current slide and on the next slide. So last year we had appropriated approximately $1.4 million. And again, that was from the amount that we had received from the provincial government of approximately $3 million. In the end, we did not need it. This money was originally allocated for a decrease in revenue from the recreation, from our recreation and parks activities, decreased revenue in building permits and fines and infractions. There was extra costs for the election to deal with COVID, and of course extra costs for the agglomeration as well, and I should say extra costs for insurance. But thankfully, in the end, we did not end up needing it, so we were able to transfer it back to the surplus. In terms of the agglomeration, this year we've seen over 10% increase in terms of the total apportionment, with the majority of this being extra funds to cover the agglomeration deficit from 2020. So we're seeing approximately a 2 to 3% increase in our regular base quote-par, and then a significant portion to cover that debt, which we understand. We're hoping that COVID will be done soon, and this number we won't be a repeat. But basically in 2020, the agglomeration had a deficit of approximately $211 million. So it's to cover our share of the agglomeration deficit. And as you can see here, originally last year we had budgeted $944,500 to cover the deficit from the agglomeration and the extra cost of the Côte Part. In the end, we didn't need that money from the surplus, and we're able to use it in 2022 to cover this amount. In terms of local expenses, so I'll talk about some of the highlights here. So a few key items to mention. The first is, or the biggest one is in terms of fringe benefits. So we see an increase from about 5.6 million to 6 million. And so there's a few points to mention. One is the way that the QPP and the pension are calculated. So there's been changes in the accounting procedures, which led to an increase. Also, the city is trying to do a better job to better reflect the way vacation days are accrued and better reflect these fringe benefit expenses, which hadn't been done exactly as it, perfectly in previous years. So that's where that comes from. And another point to mention is on the city planning and city inspection side, there's a new inspector that is being hired. The inspector's job will be to help oversee pools and deal with that in terms of the new requirements from the provincial government, as mentioned, and hopefully to lessen the load for some of the other inspectors so they can focus more on some of the other issues we've been having in terms of apartment buildings and high rises. So those are some of the highlights in terms of the local expenses under the general administration. The next one is for public safety. So here it's a pretty standard increase of 1.18 or almost 1.2%, including VCOP, EMS, and public safety. In terms of public works, so we have an increase here slightly above the average at 4.27. I'll share some of the highlights here. So the largest increase is in terms of parks and green areas, which went from 1.766, almost 1.8 million, to just over 2 million. So what the city is going to be focusing on in 2022, more work in terms of repairs to parks, more emphasis on flowers, private trees as well. And one of the other issues we've been having is with sand wasps that are in the playground area. So part of this includes an additional contract for sand maintenance. So they'll stir or mix the sand a bit more, and that hopefully will prevent, I should say, the wasps from living in the sand areas around playgrounds. So all that to say, it works out to slightly larger at 4.27, and we'll have to see, I guess, for snow. I mean, that's we're budgeting roughly the same in terms of about 2.7, 2.8 million, but with snow, it's always one that is that we have to be flexible on, and we'll see how the weather goes in terms of climate change. In terms of on the environmental side here, pretty standard in terms of a slight decrease. So one of the points is that is decreased is in terms of the water distribution for lead. So we had put in a provision here for testing of pipes. So this summer we had about 1,300 homes that were tested, and for next summer the goal is to finish testing all the homes that may have lead. And I encourage, if those residents who live in a home that is built before 1976, if you haven't had your water tested, I had mine done this summer in August. If you haven't, please sign up this summer to have your water tested. In terms of garbage removal and waste, there's a slight decrease, and the biggest difference is in terms of the black bins. So as mentioned previously, we had purchased the bins, which was approximately 240,000. So that accounts for the decrease there. I'll move on to the next slide. So in terms of lead, just as a reminder as well to residents, that there are two options that you may have if you're living in a home that was built before 1976 that may have lead. You can get a home a home filter in terms of a British style. You can also, and that's for a $50 rebate. There's also a $200 rebate for an under sink, or a $200 rebate for a 5-gallon water dispenser. And we encourage residents to do this until, of course, you know for sure that your home does not have lead, or until your pipes have been replaced. And I'll be sharing a bit more about the plans in terms of pipes a bit later when I get to the capital projects. But just to mention briefly, in 2022, the goal is to finish doing all the testing for the remainder of the roughly 3,000 homes in total that may have lead, and then come up with a comprehensive plan. So for the next year, we're going to be still working somewhat on one-offs and on small projects. But once we finish doing the testing, we'll have a comprehensive multi-year plan to deal with the remediation and removal of all the lead from the service lines in Côte Saint-Luc. In terms of recreation, so a few highlights to mention here. So one of the key ones is for the aquatic center. So we have hired some extra staff here to help in terms of the running of the building. We are also hoping, and again, I'm optimistic, if I can be optimistic, that we'll see more of a return to regular services at the aquatic center in terms of recreation. Return to normal, I would say as well. If we look at the parks or playground activity there too, we're hoping to see a return to normal, to pre-COVID levels. Just, I guess, a few other highlights in terms of arena operations, a slight increase there. Again, there are two more normal activities, and also an increase in cost of electricity in terms of maintaining the cooling of the annex, which is already beautiful ice. So I'm happy about that. And to mention, we're adding, I know last year we added, or I should say in 2021, we added more outdoor skating surfaces. And in 2022, we're adding one more even, another outdoor skating surface at Trudeau Park near the Toboggan Hill area. So I'm looking forward to seeing that one. And I hope residents will get out and skate and enjoy the weather, which hopefully will be just the perfect weather for skating. In terms of the library, pretty standard increase at 3.39%. And again, we hope things will return as closely as possible to normal for the library very soon. Next, to move on to the debt services, finance costs, and CMM. So here, I would say it's pretty stable. The biggest anomaly here to mention is the provincial share of capital repayment. So if you see here, it went from $680,920 to about $27,000. And the biggest amount there is the provincial government's share of the aquatic center. So if you can imagine, the provincial government share was roughly $6 million. That $6 million was paid over 10 years, so roughly $600,000 per year. So that's, for that reason, that amount is now reduced. And also in 2016, so the reason this number is reduced moving forward as well is in 2016, there was a change in the reconciliation process in terms of the provincial government and municipalities and how grants are done. So it changes the way this is accounted for since then. Oh, and I'll just mention one more. We increased our system reserve. So this is a reserve for emergencies or unexpected expenses if they come up, from $50,000 to $125,000. So and especially with COVID, we realize it's hard to predict what will happen. Oh, and I guess one more just to mention on the interest side, because we've been receiving better rates. So we saw a decrease on the interest on the revenue, but we see a decrease on the interest-related expenses as well. So our interest financing payments went from roughly $1.25 million to just over $1 million. In terms of the various apportionments, so again, the biggest one is the allocation from the surplus, and I'll talk about that again in a moment. Last year, we had originally allocated 1.4 million, but ended up not needing it. We have the amount from the water reserve, which will help cover or offset some of the costs of the lead testing. And there's some apportionment for pension-related costs due to the change in accounting procedures for the pension as well. So to reiterate, for the grant from the provincial government we got, so this was almost perfect amount in that we received from the provincial government last year $2,963,620. The agglomeration apportionment increase was $2,958,000. So basically about $5,000 off. So it worked out almost perfectly. So we were able to cover the cost of the 2020 deficit and the cost of the extra increase from the agglomeration. And I guess just as a final point to mention on this one, we received the amounts from the agglomeration. We've been told, and just I guess to state it for the record, we've been told that the numbers are final, although the agglomeration has not passed the budget. Normally, the budget is adopted in December. We're hoping that the numbers that we receive from the agglomeration will not change when Montreal adopts the final budget in January, in which case we're fine. If they do, then obviously that is something that could be problematic, but we've been told by Montreal that the numbers we've been given are the correct and accurate numbers. Often in previous years, it's happened that after an election, when there's a change in government, there's a delay for some reason this year. There wasn't a change in government, but there was still a delay. But anyway, we're not going to say anything more on that, other than we hope that all the numbers hold true based on what we've been given and what our city treasurer, Angela Marino, has been given, and the mayor as well. In terms of total expenses, so just to talk about how the different numbers lie. So the biggest expense is the agglomeration at 41.3%, and I'll show a pie chart in a moment, which is up from 39.1%, which is where it was last year. So that's the biggest increase. And we also see, and I'll be talking a bit more about this in a few slides, is the depreciation expense, which again is a change from the provincial government in how we do our budgeting. So here, just again, a pie chart of the previous slide. Largest expense, again, agglomeration, up about 2% from the previous year. So in terms of depreciation, so what the provincial government has asked us and all municipalities to do is to incorporate the depreciation into our operating budget, even though in the end, it's canceled out because it's non-cash item. So this is a breakdown for 2022. For 2021, we don't have the comparatives because, again, this is a new item. So for next year, we'll be able to compare it. But you see the depreciation in terms of the different departments. And again, we'll have more comparisons on this moving forward in future years. To go over the operating budget in summary. So again, the total revenues up about 4.1%, 4.15%. The local expense and apportionment is up 3.47. The biggest increase, again, is the agglomeration. When we factor in the total of the agglomeration, it's about 10.18. If we factor in just the apportionment, not including the water, 10.56. And just to mention for the water, this is an estimate. The 1.36 million is an estimate because it'll be adjusted based on the actual use. And usually on December 31st, all the water meters, in Côte Saint-Luc, there's 3 main meters that supply water to most of the city and then most of Côte Saint-Luc and a few smaller meters. So those are checked on December 31st, and then we get the actual water bill or water amounts for the year. And again, you see here the depreciation, which is being included for the first time. So that's why it's a 0, but it's netted. Well, actually it shows here on the top and then netted out on the bottom. And next year we'll be able to have more comparisons and be able to compare that in years moving forward. So I'll go through some of the property and tax rates. and again, give the example as mentioned of the average home. So these are the tax rates, and these again will be finalized next, or I should say on Wednesday. So not today, but today we'll be presenting a notice of motion, but they'll be finalized and ratified on the Wednesday meeting at 6:30. So you have the rates for residential, apartment 6+, and for vacant land. And you can see as well the road reserve that is incorporated into the different rates. For non-residential properties, you could see that we have different categories, and this was created in 2020. And the goal was to better balance out the rates. We knew, for example, the shopping malls, had a difficult time, or some of the smaller businesses. So this was done to balance out the rates and to minimize the effect on certain categories within the non-residential rates. And we know Côte Saint-Luc, in terms of non-residential, we know it's quite high compared to other municipalities. So we wanted to do our best to bring it down for certain categories. And as well here too, we have the new road reserve that is incorporated into their tax rates, or added onto their tax rates. So again, this is just to mention again, an average residential home, including the road reserve, would see a 2.25% increase. Now, in terms of how this will affect homes, and this is a complicated slide to explain, but in effect, if your increase was, so basically most homes, or the average home, had a 14.2% increase. So anyone who had below that would see a lesser tax increase, less than the 1.7. So what we see is that 24% of homes will actually see a reduction. So about a quarter of homes will actually see a reduction in their taxes paid in 2022 compared to 2021, either a reduction or 0% increase. So no, in other words, no increase. If we look at another quarter, another 25.7% are going to see a slight between 0.01 and the average of 2.25. So again, that's another quarter. So about half are below that average. The next one, about 29.5%, will see an increase about 2.26 to 3.5. 14.5% roughly will see an increase between 3.5 and 4.5, and about 6%. So these are for addresses that have seen a significant, so much larger increase in their evaluation from the current roll to the previous roll. We'll see an increase above 4.5%. And if you're not sure how to do this, it's relatively simple. You take your current evaluation divided by your previous evaluation, and that will give you the percentage increase. And then you could tell how you are in terms of comparing to this 14.2% mark. So now I'm just checking the time. I'll move on to the capital projects. So so these are some of the highlights in terms of the projects that will be financed in 2022. So one of them is sewer sleeving and aqueduct sleeving. So this is where we insert a sleeve inside a pipe, and usually we do the sewer sleevings more in the winter, and the aqueduct sleevings more in the summer. And in a moment, I'll show a slide that gives the percentages of pipes that have been sleeved. We're doing more lead pipe replacement, installation of 380 residential water meters. So over the last few years, we've done and installed water meters in what we call the ICI, which are the industrial, commercial, and institutional buildings in Côte Saint-Luc. And the next step is to do some piloting with residential homes, more road resurfacing, sidewalk repair, LED streetlights, parks and public spaces, the ACC roof and building envelope, and more focus on replenishing the public works fleet. So I'll go through some of these. I'll start with the water infrastructure. So for this, we are part of our 2019 to 2023 tech grant. So the tech grant again is for the gas tax, and that is an amount that is paid through from the provincial and federal government. So most of this will be covered. And if we look at what we've done I'll start with the current year. So the current year, we've done 226 pneumatic excavations. So that is where we do a small dig to check whether the pipes or whether the residential side or the city side is lead versus copper. We've done 52 lead service line replacements just on this project, and an additional 22 were done as part of the regular water infrastructure maintenance through CMO, and another 44 were done through the road repairs. So over 100 lead service lines were replaced in 2021. And for the upcoming year, for 2022, the goal is to do 887 pneumatic excavations. So it's to do a large number of these excavations, and that'll give us a better sense in terms of whether both sides, the residential and the city side, are lead, and that'll better help us plan and map out a long-term plan to address and deal with the remediation of the lead that is in the service lines. And we are replacing at least 58 lead service lines in the year 2022. Here you can see some of the breakdown for the water pipes, the water mains. So Côte Saint-Luc, we have about 17.5 kilometers of water mains. So of those, nearly a quarter have been sleeved over the years. And what we've seen is a significant decrease in the number of water main breaks per year. We used to have, in the early years, when I was first a councillor, we had about 28.4 per year on average. The last few years, we've been averaging about 10 a year. What that means is a lot less breaks, a lot less damage, a lot less basements flooded, or cars. I hate to say cars that were totaled, because when the car is flooded in a basement or in a garage, it ends up being irreplaceable and damage, of course, to residents' homes as well. So we're happy about that, and we hope to see this number continue to drop. In terms of roads and sidewalks, there's a few roads that are planned. So we have a section of Haywood, Mather, and Schweitzer. We're also looking at repaving the fire station parking lot, although this is dependent on us receiving funds from the City of Montreal to cover the bulk of the cost for the parking lot at the fire station. We're also planning on doing more sidewalk repair. We've done about 6,500 meters over the last 5 years. So the goal again would be to do about 1,000 or over 1,000 meters. And in terms of LED streetlights, we replaced virtually all the Cobra head streetlights in the city of Côte Saint-Luc, so about 526 LED lights. And the goal over the next few years are to replace what we call the cubes. So those are the smaller or lower lights that you see on some of the side streets. And the goal is to do those over the next few years. Not only is it more energy efficient, but it'll also be a nicer light, a safer light, and hopefully less light going up in the air and more going down, because the current lights tend to light up the sky and not as much on the ground. Here you can see a map of some of the roads that have been done over the last 15 years or so. So quite a lot, but the goal is still to do some catch up as part of the road reserve and the regular roads that are done each year. So we're going to continue to focus on this as well as the pipes. In terms of parks and public spaces, so one of the priorities has been with trees. Since 2015, we have planted just over 2,000 trees, either planting or given out. However, we've cut down about the same amount. We're actually still overall in a slight deficit, mostly because of the emerald ash borer. So the goal is to catch up. We're planning more small park upgrades and playground equipment. In terms of the parks, we have a three-pronged approach. The first is to deal with water in the parks. We know there's some parks that have no water fountains or no water structures at all, water play structures. We're looking also at shade because we want to make sure children are safe, especially with climate change. And finally, to deal with the surfaces, I mentioned some issues with the sand. So long term, the goal would be to keep some sand in parks, but to replace as much as possible either with wood chips or rubberized surface where appropriate. There's also some work on Trudeau Park in terms of the irrigation and the baseball field defenses and lights. and professional services for the Itzhak Rabin wading pool, which will be converted into a splash pad. That'll be coming up. So the professional services will be done next year, with the work predicted or planned to be done in 2023. And I should mention, the smaller park upgrade is funded through the surplus, the cumulative surplus. In terms of other building and local improvements, we're looking at more electric charging stations, both for the city, so for EMS, where the goal is for this year to purchase some electric vehicles. We're also looking for the public at the Sammy Moscovich Arena, and for the first time in Côte Saint-Luc, we'll have curbside charging on Bailey in front of Fletcher Park. So this will be an opportunity. We know in certain areas, residents who live in apartment buildings or multifamily units don't have access to chargers. So this will be hopefully the first of many to come. And we hope it'll be more encouragement for residents to purchase electric vehicles as we ourselves continue to electrify our fleet. There's also work on the arena and Singerman Park Chalet. There's some repairs to rooftop structures at City Hall, the ACC roof and building envelope, and another mobility chair for the Aquatic Center, which is funded through the Working Fund. And this is to help those that have difficulties to enter the pool in a seamless process. We have one of these, but the purpose is for a second mobility chair. Next, in terms of the vehicles, so what you could see is, we're trying to replace some of the older vehicles. The oldest one, I won't go through all of them, but the oldest, just keeping track of time, but the oldest one to mention is the 1976 Zamboni. I was skating at the arena the other day, and I saw the old Zamboni, and it's seen better days. It's almost as old as I am, but I won't quite say how old I am. But 1976 Zamboni will be replaced by a new one. This was our backup. It was used for many, many years, and like I said, it's seen the end of its days. In terms of the equipment, furniture, so we have some key ones here. So we're looking to upgrade the AV equipment in the Aquatic Center. This will help more for Zooms or teleconferencing. For security cameras, each year we upgrade and purchase new cameras. Switches, these are to, again, better be able to pair technologically. I know, the city workers, especially now, for example, more will be working from home based on the provincial government guidelines. We want to make sure they're able to do everything they can. We also replace each year a certain amount of staff equipment, roughly every 5 years. In terms of the library furniture, so this was to replace some of the furniture purchased back in 2006 in the AV and fireplace lounge that has shown some signs of wear and tear. And again, more video streaming for hopefully a time soon when we'll be able to go back to meetings in person. And finally, some replacements for the sheds in the public works yards, which were old, I should say, when I was first elected back in 2005, and will be replaced slowly over the next few years. So to give, big picture, so the total in terms of 2022, it's about almost 12.5 million. However, if we look at the grants, the largest being from the provincial and federal government through the tech grant, which is about 6 million, and then other sources of financing, including partly from the surplus. So that removes about 7 million. So the capital expenses to be financed is just under 6 million, which is a number, we've been trying to keep it in that vicinity to make sure that we don't increase our the percent of debt load or percent of the operating budget that goes to paying off the debt. And I believe that is the last slide. So I went maybe a few minutes long, but I'll just check with our Director of Communications to see if there's any questions.
There are no questions.
Okay. So maybe any questions from any of my fellow councillors? I see Councillor Cohen.
Okay, Councillor Cohen.
I don't have a question. I just want to thank Angelo Marino, his amazing staff, and Councillor Erdely, who really, I think he blows us all away with how he handles this dossier and how he does this presentation. You could tell that he was a fabulous school teacher that I worked with for many years, and he's a fantastic head of school. And we're all students who would love to have you as a teacher. So thank you for all the hard work you did and on this dossier, and keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cohen. And yeah, if I can add, we are very lucky to have Angelo Marino as our city treasurer. I've encouraged him to. I told him he's gonna never be able to retire because he has to stay with Côte Saint-Luc forever, because we love him and appreciate so much what he does. And I have to say he makes us all look good. So we thank him for that.
I want to thank you, Councillor Erdely, our excellent Minister of Finance, and of course, Angelo Marino, for being the best treasurer anybody could ever wish for. We are truly blessed in the city of Côte Saint-Luc with having Angelo manage our funds, and Councillor Erdely being able to explain to all of us exactly what's going on. I don't know if you're going to be handing out a little quiz at the end of this, so we'll all see if we were listening. But it was extremely well done. I know we have another meeting shortly. It's supposed to start at 7, but we're going to need about 10, 15 minutes until the next meeting.
So we just have to, before we adjourn,
pass the budget. You have to pass
two motions.
Two motions.
So maybe Mr. Mayor, if that's okay, I'll start with the first one.
Go ahead.
So be it resolved that Côte Saint-Luc hereby adopts the 2022 operating budget as follows: revenues of $78,388,700, expenses and appropriations $78,388,700, for a total surplus or deficit of 0. Hereby annexed to the minutes to form an integral part of said document entitled Appendix 1.
Moved by Councillor Erdely, seconded by Councillor Burku. Any further discussion on the budget? All in favor? Anyone opposed? It's carried unanimously. And now we move to the next item, which is the 3-year capital budget.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Be it resolved that Côte Saint-Luc City Council hereby accepts and adopts the 3-year capital expenditure plan for 2022, 2023, 2024 years, totaling $37,058,000 plus applicable taxes, hereby annexed to the minutes to form an integral part of said document entitled Appendix 2.
Moved by Councillor Erdely, seconded by Councillor Burku.
Just to mention one more point. So we are officially adopting all 3 years. However, we will represent, next year we'll present again the 3-year projects. So the ones that are, that will most likely be done are, of course, the ones for 2022, and the ones for 23 and 24 are still subject to change, I should mention.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion on this item? Okay, all in favor? Anyone opposed? It is carried unanimously. And now I'll ask for a motion for adjournment, and then we'll be back at the next meeting in about 10 minutes. Okay?
Right.
Motion for adjournment. Councillor Cohen, Councillor Schuster, seconded by Councillor Cohen. All in favor? Thank you. We're adjourned. We'll see you guys all in 10 minutes at the next meeting.